Child here, and welcome to another edition of Dusting It Off. Today we're going to be looking at one of my really old fanfics, the very first chapter fanfic I ever wrote, called When Logic Fails. This was in the Great Mouse Detective fandom. I had basically just discovered fanfiction. I wrote a one-shot about the Phantom of the Opera, and I was obsessed. Well, not really obsessed, that's a term better used for my interest in Invader Zim, but I really loved the Great Mouse Detective. It seemed like nobody else I knew really cared about the Great Mouse Detective, so I wanted to write a fanfiction. Synopsis. After the Flaversham case, Basil discovers that little Olivia had done more than steal his heart. She's awakened unwanted memories. At the same time, Ratigan is alive, and he's about to drop a bombshell on Basil's already fragile world. I should note that this is a revised version of the story. At some point, I think maybe 3 or 4 years after I wrote it, I went back and did a revision, condensed some chapters, I got rid of some of my old errors, but that still was a really long time ago. So let's see what, and hold on, this was first published in 2006, so I was just about to turn... I was just about to turn 17, so at that time, I wrote this. Wait, oh, it looks like I revised it about 1 year later. Author's note: due to the fact that this was written such a long time ago, apparently a year is a long time, and I think I could do a much better job, or at least clean it up a bit, I've taken it upon myself to rewrite and or edit this story chapter by chapter. And it is 7 chapters long. Okay, so here we go. When Logic Fails. Prologue. He gasped, tearing at his pillow with frantic grasps. Philly, no, said to stay. I'll get her. No! He lurched up in bed, his breath coming in great gulps. His eyes darted around the room, searching for the phantoms he had seen a moment ago in his dreams. Frustrated, he dragged his paws through his sweat-soaked hair. Sighing, he pulled himself out of bed. There would be no more sleep that night for Basil of Baker Street. Oh, right, I still am kind of fond of line breaks. And since I'm reading this aloud, I will have to say the word line break for whenever that happens. Line break. Chapter 1, Nightmares. The whistling tea kettle called him to the stove. Mechanically, he lifted it off the burner and poured its contents into a thick, lumpy brown mug. A smile twitched at the corner of his mouth. Olivia had dropped by his home Christmas morning to present her gift. Made it myself, she had grinned impishly. He picked up the mug and moved into the living room, easing himself into the armchair. Staring blankly at the cold fireplace, he stirred the tea aimlessly. I should make up a fire if I'm going to sit here all night. But he made no move to do so. His vision was spinning, and he was sucked through the years and the darkness. I won't say this is necessarily a horrific thing to do here, but there was no build-up to the fact that he's about to have a flashback here. Suddenly, his vision spinning is it's a physical reaction. It's not just something that can pop up on you out of nowhere, and if it does, you better call a doctor really quickly. I mean, it would be better to do some build-up on this before dropping in the fact that he's, about to have a flashback on something. Or at least tie it to something. I don't really seem to tie it to anything except that he just sat down. So, line break. Now, dear, be careful with her. He stopped for a moment to glance at the speaker, a slim, beautiful mouse with soft white fur. She had put on a light patterned summer gown, and her paws fidgeted with her necklace. You're just going to have to take my word for it. My commas are out of control. I could have restructured this sentence so that there were a lot less commas and it flowed better. Basil laughed at his wife's concern and called back, Come now, Philly. Do you think I could really hurt her even if I tried? She's a big, strong girl, aren't you, Leisha? I feel like I could have come up with better names than Philly and Leisha. Philly, first of all, is what you call a female baby horse. That doesn't really work with female grown-up mouse. And I'm trying to remember if Leisha was short for something. I'm sure I'll find out soon, but I don't think it was. And then just what kind of, I just don't understand why he would have called her Leisha. It just doesn't seem to fit. I think I really wanted to make up my own names and not borrow names, and I always kind of stretched a little too far when I did that. The mouseling gazing up at him gave him a smile fit to split her light tan face. Okay. Really need to separate out descriptors. Again, not the worst thing in the world right there, but giving a brief descriptor and then saying a smile split her face is better than trying to shoehorn in the description of what her face is as the smile is splitting it. Of course, father, I can take on anything. She rammed into him to prove herself, and he obliged by falling down dramatically. Oh, I'm wounded, he wailed. The great Leisha has brought me down. The little one paused from her play, worry creasing her face. This is the end of me, he continued. Terrified that she had actually caused her father harm, she scampered to his side. He promptly caught her up in his arms and twirled her around and around as she shrieked in delight. Abruptly the image warped and shifted, his child's face twisted with fear, screaming. Line break. Oh, my good fellow, are you all right? Basil started, spilling stone-cold tea all over his nightrobe. Years of training leaped into action as he leaped across the room. Leaped. Twice in the same sentence. Don't do it. Years of training leaped into action as he leaped across the room and placed the intruder in a stranglehold before he realized that the spluttering mouse he was holding was Dawson. He let go, deeply embarrassed. I feel like I keep saying this. It would have been better. It's not terrible, but it would have been better if I could have shown, like, the little details leaking through that it was Dawson, and a slow realization that this is not an intruder, instead of, oh, Dawson, you know? I kind of wish I had kept it as is so that I could see what it was before I revised it, but... He let go, deeply embarrassed. Oh, Dawson, it's you. So sorry, old chap. Thought it was someone else. I'll say, exclaimed the portly mouse in bewilderment. Where on earth did that come from? Nowhere, and everywhere, was the uneasy reply. Overly enigmatic, it doesn't make sense. Come on, this isn't really Basil. He wouldn't say nowhere and everywhere. He bent to clean up my mess. I'm pretty sure I meant he bent to clean up the mess, not he bent to clean up my mess. After a brief pause, Dawson joined him. I wonder if the first version of this was written in first person. Maybe that's why the word my is still there, because it's possible I went through and changed everything to third person. That would be interesting. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. Let's go to chapter 2. These are very short. The whole story is just 8,500 words. So, chapter 2, The Note. He leans over, kissing the sleeping head goodnight. She shifts and mumbles something, throwing her tiny paws in the air. Oh, it's been a long time since I read this. He catches them gently and sets them down, tucking her under the covers. His heart swells with love for the small, curled form. Ugh. On the subject of unnecessary additions, tell me what sounds better. His heart swells with love for the small, curled form, or his heart swells for the small, curled form. Cutting words sometimes just makes it tighter and things make more sense. Not to say that you shouldn't use extra words for descriptors. It really depends on how you're using them. But if they are unnecessary, if they're kind of redundant or kind of leeches hanging off the end of richer words, then you should lose them because it'll make the sentence stronger. Good night, Leisha. Tiptoeing out, he is met by Philly. I will never get over this name. What was I thinking? She places a loving paw on his arm, which he seizes and kisses. Her paws are wrinkled and calloused from work at the laundry, but he doesn't care. They are beautiful to him. She pulls her hand away and circles her arms around his waist, burying her face in his shoulder. He brings his arms up behind her to hold her close. He can smell the soap in her fur. They stand in the hallway, just holding each other. The view shifts. He still holds her, but she is not holding him. She can't hold him. Her arms lie limply by her side, and her eyes are vacant. He is crying. Again, what if I could tighten that up just a little bit by saying, he still holds her, but she is not holding him, and drop, she can't hold him. It's redundant. I don't need it. It would make it stronger to lose it. Line break. Blast! Basil looked up from the breakfast table to see who had shouted. He wondered why the housekeeper and Dawson were staring until he realized that he was the one who had yelled. I know there's a trope where, like, who's screaming and, oh, it's me, but I'm not sure it works here. I'm actually not sure I can tell you why, but I'm not sure that yelling is a pretty deliberate thing. Screaming can be involuntary terror, but yelling in anger, blast, and blast is obviously an angry thing. I'm not so sure about that. Excuse me, my deepest apologies. He blushed. The housekeeper's brows were drawn together in a deep frown. Basil, you've been acting strangely lately, said Dawson cautiously. That's 3 LYs right in a row. What's wrong? Nothing, he hastily assured. And everything, he mumbled to himself. Stop doing that! That's not you. That's not Basil. That is not Basil. That's not in character. That's just me trying to be enigmatic and mysterious at 17. Dawson shot him a sharp look, having heard the last part as well. Basil dropped his gaze back to his plate. He chewed on his muffin quietly, but in his mind 1,000 curses raged. No, he corralled his emotions. You are not in control. You will not take over. Oh, blast, I have to distract myself or I'll slip and lose it again. I cannot. I will not go back to that black hole again. Get a hold of yourself and think, Basil. What is the opposite of emotion? What can obliterate emotion? Logic, yes, logic. I need a case. That will calm me down, pull me out of this. But a case isn't just going to knock on the door because I need one. I might not get another case for weeks. That would be too late. I'd be sucked down into that pit again. No, there must be something I can concentrate on. Let's see, puzzles? No, I finished them too quickly. Chemicals? But what would I make? Maybe painting would... Okay, so that's the end of that paragraph, and I'm just going to talk about that for a little bit. It would be a lot more effective. This is all one paragraph, and I don't think that his state is effectively conveyed by the internal monologue. The internal monologue is a great tool, and it's a lot of fun to use, especially if somebody's emotions are running really high, or if the mental state is especially haywire. It's fabulous to work with. But here, we don't even know why he's upset. Don't really have an anchor for this. We don't know what it is he's trying to avoid. It would have been better, I think, if I cut this down by half at least. Phrased it more along the lines of third person, like he corralled his emotions, reminding himself that he was in control. He quickly flipped through several possible cases in his mind, wondering which one would be enough to distract him for the next day. That's just off the top of my head. I think better when I have a keyboard in front of me, but I think my point stands. It would have been better conveyed, I think, in third person. So he does this whole internal monologue, and then it's cut off. The housekeeper's shriek snapped him out of his reverie. A quick glance at the table revealed I'd been lost in thought for quite a while. Okay, yeah, I definitely wrote this in first person and changed it because I have all these slips here where I say I had instead of he had, so... The housekeeper's shriek snapped him out of his reverie. A quick glance at the table revealed I'd been lost in thought for quite a while, for breakfast had been cleared away and he was alone at the table. He sprang to his feet, overturning the chair, and rushed toward the screams. He found her in the kitchen, in Dawson's arms. He was consoling her as best he could. Okay, it would be good if I said Dawson, because the he here could be confused with Basil. He was consoling her as best as he could, but the poor mouse was overwhelmed himself. Catching Basil's eye, he motioned to an open note on the counter. Basil picked it up and scanned it. To the scum-sucking second-rate detective it may concern. Guess who? Basil's last shred of confidence left. Okay, we really haven't established that he's at the end of his rope yet. It says his last shred of confidence as if he's been losing it and is at the very end. I haven't established at all that we're toward the end of that. Or that he's losing confidence. I mean, this isn't about confidence. This is about his emotional state, which we are not even sure why he's this upset yet. I have not established why, and I haven't established any kind of decent build-up to this idea. I'm not thrilled with how this is going. Basil's last shred of confidence left. Through the front door, maybe. He sagged against the counter. So, he whispered, he's still alive. After a moment, he crumpled the note in his hand and shrilled at the ceiling. God in heaven, haven't I endured enough already? Basil! Dawson's tone brought his gaze back down. His housekeeper was trembling and sobbing. He threw his paws in the air. What do you want me to say to her, Dawson? That everything will be all right? That I can catch him for sure this time? Nothing is certain anymore, Dawson. Do you hear me? Nothing is certain anymore. He was supposed to be dead, but somehow he's not. He's not! He is still roaming the streets and plotting from the sewers. I've expended every effort I have, Dawson. There's nothing left to throw at him, so I'm sorry, he seethed, directing his attention to the quivering housekeeper. But I can't assure you or calm your fears or anything of the sort, because I've got too many bloody fears myself. She sat weakly and tried to stifle her sobs. Oh, take the day off, Basil snarled. I want to be alone. Without waiting for a response, he fled upstairs, ignoring her tears and Dawson's outraged indignation. I cannot stress how much this needs more build-up. Every paragraph I go deeper into this, I feel that I'm cashing in on something I just have not fairly built up at all. Line break. He curled into a ball, trying to give their fists and claws a smaller target, pounding and scratching from all sides. A large paw found his shirt collar and snatched him off the ground. He gasped, trying to breathe as the nightmarish figure thrust his face into Basil's. What's the matter, Basil? Can't put up your dukes? Basil could smell Roden's delight on Radigan's breath. He held his silence. He knew Radigan was in perfect control. The rat could always hold his liquor, but was putting on a drunk act to frighten him. Aw, Basil, not even going to put up a fight? That's okay. He clumsily patted Basil's head with his other paw. Everyone knows that Mises can't fight back. Too small and weak. Basil refused to respond. Radigan frowned and flung him against the wall, where his head cracked against the smooth stone of Oxford's dormitory. Problem is I call it Oxford instead of whatever the mouse equivalent might be, which would probably be carved into the base of Oxford and into the walls of Oxford, but wouldn't actually be Oxford. Cheer on the good old campus, Radigan giggled over his shoulder, waving at the gang to follow. Basil lay stunned for a while, then slowly picked himself up and crawled to his dormitory, where his roommate, Dormus, helped him clean himself up. Someday, Dormus. Basil winced as his friend helped him clean his cuts. Someday Radigan will be a wanted criminal. Dormus laughed good-naturedly and asked, And what will you be? His eyes narrowed to slits as he whispered, The detective who puts him away. Dun, dun, dun! Chapter 3. Assigned. Up one street, down the next, he wandered the cul-de-sacs in aimless loops. Pacing in the park like a mouse that had lost something, Basil frantically tried to hold on to his crumbling sanity. Okay, I can't say this enough. I didn't build up enough. Grief shot through him at the morning's memories. Though long forgotten, they'd been dredged from the depths of his mind. By what? I keep asking this, and I may have said it in the description, but the description is not part of the story, and I didn't say how Olivia's presence is dredging up the memories that we're getting here. It's no. The sound of laughter jerked him from his thoughts. Glancing up, he found himself by the playground, and, much to his chagrin, face to face with an upside-down Olivia Flaversham. Basil, she giggled from her position on the monkey bars. Catch me, I'm slipping. Dutifully, he held out his arms. Line break. Hold on, Leisha, I'm coming. He forced his legs to move faster, pushing them as hard as he dared. Those screams, where were they coming from? There. He turned and skittered into an alley, bowling into a stocky lizard that seized and held him tightly. Basil writhed but could not free himself. A low chuckle halted his frantic struggle. Horror clenched his stomach as he looked up to see Radigan holding his daughter. She was bound in wire, but her mouth had been left ungagged. All the better to lure me, he thought grimly. Father! Father, help! Her sea-blue eyes were wide with terror. He ached to take her in his arms and run from this place, but he could do nothing. Well, wonderful performance, my dear. You have brought me your father, smiled the rat. Comma at the end there, not a period, because there's a dialogue tag. And smiled is not a said dialogue tag, and it's wrong, and he can't fix it. It's already published. I'm not your dear. Let me go, she howled, biting his gloved hand. Shouting an oath, he dropped her in surprise. Go, Leisha! Roll away and scream, yelled Basil. I know I was trying to suggest something practical since she couldn't run because she's all tied up, but if someone says run, you'll get it. Even if you're bound, you'll figure it out that you're supposed to roll. And people's first thing is not to say roll, it's to say run. Even if it doesn't make sense. That's the first instinct, say run. Go, Alicia, roll away and scream, yelled Basil. It just doesn't sound right. But Ratigan snatched her up once more. Scowling, he jerked his head at his followers. The lizard hoisted Basil onto his shoulders and followed Ratigan. What I could have done here that would have been better, I feel, instead of calling them by their species, just because we don't really know their names, as far as I know, but instead of calling them the lizard, I could have had Basil recognize them and given them a couple of the henchmen names and personalities, because if he's gone up against Ratigan and his gang more than once, I'm sure he actually knows who they are. I'm sure he knows their rep sheets. I'm sure all of the stuff that I totally missed out on. It was an opportunity, and I just passed it up. So the lizard hoisted Basil onto his shoulders and followed Ratigan. Several twists, turns, and alleyways later, they arrived behind an old dumpster where Basil was dumped in a gilded chair. Before he could twitch, wrist clamps and leg restrainers locked down on him. Why is it a gilded chair? Why does that matter? I mean, unless they're actually openly mocking him about something, about royalty or something, it would make more sense if it was just a regular old wooden splintered chair with restraints on it. Before he could twitch, wrist clamps and leg restrainers locked down on him. You should be proud, Basil, Ratigan sneered. That is my personal chair. Very few sit in that chair and rise alive. But that makes no sense! Why in the world are there wrist clamps and leg restrainers on Ratigan's personal chair? Does he have some lemony secrets that we'd rather not know? Basil raised his brow. Does that mean I'm going to live? Ratigan bared his fangs in an ugly grin. We shall see. He snapped his fingers and Alicia was brought forward by two thugs. The wires had cut into her skin and a thick cloth was stuffed in her mouth. Blood matted parts of her fur. Her tail trembled, but her face was defiant. Could be described better. Instead of saying her face was defiant, could have talked about the gleam in her eye and the set of her jaw. Even through the rag she was mumbling things, All that sort of stuff will convey defiance without saying the word defiant. Basil's attention was snagged by the sight of a bonfire blazing several feet away. Is that human feet or is that mousy feet? Because that's a big difference. A few of Ratigan's thugs fed the fire with wood chips, crowing with anticipation. His stomach knotted tighter as Ratigan grabbed Alicia by the tail and dragged her toward the flames. Without a shadow of emotion on his face, Ratigan picked up the trembling mouse, looked her squarely in the eyes, and dropped her into the flames. No! Again, we should define that. His scream burst out. Ratigan, no! Not her! Ratigan merely laughed and released Basil's wrist restraints. He launched from the chair, falling short of the fire by a few inches, for his leg clamps held tight. Switched it around, held tight by his leg clamps. Something like that, He stretched his arm, his fingertips brushing the flames, but he was unable to touch his daughter. Her eyes shut tightly, and her little body curled into a tight ball in a futile attempt to escape the heat. That's an understatement! She's on fire! She could not scream, could not speak, but as her hair and flesh danced with flames, she opened her eyes and looked at Basil. You can't open your eyes will burn. You're now blind, Alicia, you are now blind. Except she's not, because I can't tell you, but she's not blind, but she should be blind. In her eyes, he saw silent screams of anguish and confusion. You can't see screams! And you especially can't see silent screams! In her eyes, he saw silent screams of anguish and confusion. Why her father wouldn't help her? Her body shuddered a bit, then lay limply among the flames. Thrashing, I think. Thrashing is in order for something like that. Not laying limply among the flames. She could have rolled out. She realized that she wasn't tied to anything. She was just bound up. She'd still be on fire, but she could at least roll out. He couldn't speak. He couldn't think. All he could see was his child burning and screaming silently. He didn't feel the arms hoisting him from the ground and unlocking his leg clamps. He didn't feel pain when the arms threw him to the ground, but he heard his wife coming. With the last of his strength, he screamed, Philly, no! Go home! Go! A gunshot echoed through the alley. Radigan swaggered around the corner, blowing smoke from his pistol. "Let him go, men. He won't be worth a cracked farthing after this." He grinned and swept an entrance bow, inviting Basil to see his handiwork. Basil leaped from the ground and scampered around the corner, daring to hope. There she lay, in her Sunday dress, her head split open and gushing blood. He dropped to his knees, retching. Gathering her body in his arms, he wept. He sensed Radigan standing over him, but he didn't care. He heard police sirens drawing nearer, but he didn't care. All he could do was sit and rock his wife's body as her blood soaked into his clothing. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. A little overdramatic, but the biggest thing I want to ask is, why is his wife coming? I mean, did they call her and tell her to come too? Was she following behind Basil? How did she find did she hear screams? Did she hear Basil's screams? I mean, how did she know to come there? Doesn't make any sense. Line break. "Mr. Basil, what's wrong?" Olivia was staring at him. He touched his cheek and felt wet, matted fur. "Blast if I know, Olivia," he choked. Line break. The small figure huddled in an oversized cloak, rushing past the empty streets. "This work's best done at night," she mused to herself. Would this person really muse such a thing to herself? If she already knew this, I mean, that's for the audience benefit, and therefore it is redundant. Things like that need to be set in such a way that she's not thinking to herself something that she obviously wouldn't be thinking to herself because it's inherent to her. She glanced up at the lamplit street signs and swore. Wonderful. Lost again. Knew this would happen. Ain't my fault, though. If he'd let me out more often, I'd have got to know these bloody streets by now. In which an American tries and fails to do a Cockney dialect in a fan fiction. She frowned, scanning the road for people. Her gaze snagged on a tall mouse dressed in a warm overcoat, walking briskly up the street. Relieved, she nearly called to him, but something held her back. Instinct told her to watch first and be seen later, and instinct had never been wrong. Silent as the shadows, she trailed him for nearly a mile until he turned a corner at the cemetery. Frowning in surprise, she eased in after him. Well, why would she be surprised? It's a mouse she doesn't know. With business she doesn't know. Why shocked that he'd be going to a cemetery? The mouse continued more slowly now. The moonlight illuminated his face, and she was astonished to see great tears rolling down his cheeks. "Blow me, I thought for sure their sex never cried. A 17-year-old child?" Fascinated, she crouched in the shadow of an angelic monument and watched. Leisha, don't blink. Line break. Trembling, he approached their graves. He had ordered the most beautiful headstones, black-veined white marble. He knelt on the ground, caressing the monuments, patting the ground. Got the best for them, of course. Couldn't get less. They deserved the best. Basil spoke quietly to himself, unaware of his audience. Had to get the best for them. Had to make up for not saving. He crumpled to the ground, covering the graves with kisses and tears. Racked by grief, he could only cry, "I'm sorry," to the cold, unfeeling earth. Way over dramatic. I didn't earn it. And he's explaining out loud, again, what should be inherent. And not even something that he would be saying to them. He's saying it to himself and the fourth wall. This scene requires a lot more subtlety than I gave it. Line break. Because I'm addicted to line breaks at this age. She was astounded. She had never seen such a display. Who was this mouse, and who were the graves for? Unsure of her reasons, she trailed the tall mouse to his home. With a jolt, she realized he was leading her to her assignment's house. What luck! She allowed 10 minutes' time after he entered the house, then walked up and knocked on the door. Quickly smearing onion juice under her eyes to ensure a convincing cry, she pulled up her cloak and looked up to meet the eyes of the most haggard mouse she had ever seen. His appearance was so pitiful she doubted her need for onion juice to conjure weeping. You think the great Basil of Baker Street wouldn't smell the onion juice and wonder if something was up? Pardon me, good sir, I'm looking for me daughter. I think she ran away. Have you seen her? She's short with coal-black fur and... I'm sorry, madam, but I haven't seen a mouse of that description, Basil sighed. She lowered her face into her hands and wept. Madam, it's late. Why don't you come in and have some tea? He offered half-heartedly. Oh, thank you. She sniffled. Some tea may help me think where she's gone. She peered inside the nicely furnished apartment and asked, Your master won't mind. I am the master of this house, he stated wearily. Basil of Baker Street. Line break. She felt her heart skip and fall. Gritting her teeth, she set her will. There was no way around it. Grieving mouse or not, he was her assignment, and he had to be dealt with. Wringing her hands, she walked into the apartment. Chapter 4. Confrontation. He couldn't put his paw on it, but Basil sensed something was wrong about his visitor. The way she kept wringing her hands. It could have been anxiety for the allegedly missing child, or it could be nerves because... He shook the thoughts off. I'm tired. Exhaustion often brings on paranoia. Really? I'm exhausted a lot. It doesn't bring me paranoia all the time. Not that it can't bring on paranoia, but... exhaustion equals paranoia is basically what I just said. Glancing over her, he noticed the fur on her paws was quite sparse, and that they had a number of unusual wrinkles on them. He poured her some mint leaf tea and motioned to an overstuffed cloth chair. Something's not quite right about this. There's something in the air. It almost smells like onions? No, come on, Basil, buddy, you would know. You would know, and you would have known the second she was in your door. The second you opened the door, you would have known this. Without taking her eyes off the teacup, the mouse pleaded, I heard so much about you, that you can solve any case, that you can track any crook. I have all the newspapers about the Flaversham case. If you could find your way to... And I know that I can't say this right. I'm trying to give the dialect that I was obviously trying to write, and it's a train wreck. So I apologize. She took a deep breath, as if collecting herself. To help me find my little girl. She wiped away more tears. I would be so happy. She peered up anxiously. I dunna have lots of money, but I can work for the rest. Please, she means heaps to me. She sighed. But I suppose you wouldn't understand, being a bachelor. Basil sucked in a breath. Not a bachelor, madam. A widower. Line break. Shocked, the mouse tightened her grip on the teacup. A widower? He told me the mouse was a bloody bachelor. Filthy, stinking, crawling, conniving. Hastily, she lifted the cup to her lips and sipped, swallowing hard. I'm sorry. Were you close? Very, he murmured, focusing on the rug. Venturing a bit further, she asked, And kids? Gone. My wife and daughter were killed. He fumbled with his pipe and struck a match to light it, not catching the wince that crossed his guest's face. Abruptly realizing how cold the room was, he trudged out for firewood. Now you done it, you big blundering oaf, she sighed. Why did her first assignment have to be so hard? 'Cause he wants to test you, he mocked. Wants to make sure where your loyalties lie. Sighing, she adjusted her hat to hang over her face. It didn't matter to him whether the target saw her or not, but it mattered to her. She hated the stares. It hurt too much. A rattling thump drew her attention to the fireplace, where Basil went to unload firewood. Panic clawed at her throat, but she gripped the teacup and forced herself to keep still. You can do this. It's just a little one, not wild. It can't touch you. It can't touch you. It can't. He struck the match. With growing horror, she watched his paw descend to the wood. Line break. No! The young lady exploded from her seat and fled for the door. Astonished, Basil hastily snuffed out the match and ran after her. She reached the door and flung it open, dashing outside as rain began to fall. Because rain always falls when it's dramatic scenes, right, guys? Stop! Wait! Did I do something wrong? He called, a few footsteps behind her, wondering to himself what was wrong with lighting a fire. Halfway down the street, he managed to grab her shoulders and spun her around to face him. Her hat fell away and her coat pulled back, revealing her frightened features. Her face had no fur, her eyes no lashes. Her skin was covered in blackened scars, twisted every which way as tortured, mutilated skin broke through beneath. Rain formed rivulets down her cheeks, making puddles in the deep cracks and crevices there. Their eyes met for a moment. Then she spun around and dashed into the nearest alley. Blindly, he rushed after her, but she had disappeared. He stood in the pouring rain, unable to believe what he had seen. Her eyes were sea blue. And that's what's supposed to be the know-all moment where he knows it's his daughter. How many mice in the city have sea blue eyes? Even taking into account her skin. How many, it's just not enough of an indicator to me. Again, I'm trying to cash in on something I haven't built up and earned. That seems to be my main complaint of this fic, is cashing in on stuff I just didn't build up and earn. Line break. She huddled in the sewer, crying real tears. Swiping at them angrily, she fumed. Who the blazes was that mouse? Why is he so bleedin' familiar? The shame, the shame. She had to get away or she would die of shame. This is all his fault. When I get back, I'll... She chuckled. That's a real good 'un, Leash. What can a puny little mouse like you do to the likes of Ratigan? Line break. Snicky! Snicky! Blast, where's he got to? Her shouts drew stares from all over the crowded hall. Its great arched dome glittered with stolen gold and jewels. Unless brought through the secret entrance, one would never believe it was all underground. Leisha scanned the besotted masses. Besotted? Besotted. First meaning is strongly infatuated, and that's the common meaning today, and the archaic meaning, and I swear they call it the archaic meaning, is intoxicated and drunk. And of course I meant the archaic meaning, you know, the one that nobody uses anymore. Figures. Oh, Alicia scanned the besotted masses until her eyes locked on a tall green lizard swaying drunkenly and cackling. Shoving her way through the crowd, she seized his claws and dragged him aside, muttering apologies to his friends. Would she apologize, though? I mean, she's pretty brazen, and they're all pretty brazen. I would think that there wouldn't be a lot of apologies in that group. Oh, what's the big idea, Leash? It's just in the middle of a right filthy joke, too, he whined. He would just call it a joke. He wouldn't say it was filthy. It would just, again, be implied, I think. Or he would say something like, I was right in the middle of a joke about the two cats in heat, or something like that. Shut up, you big lout, and tell me where's Ratigan. His eyes widened. Nobody goes to the boss unless he calls for us. I dinna give the rat's end, she snarled. Just tell me where he is. Snicky roared with laughter. This'll be real good. You up against the boss. I'll place my bets. I can't write drunk slur, can I? Wiping his eyes, he pointed a shaky finger down a long corridor. He's down there, in the private room. Think he's thinking about the bleeding detective again. Surely is missing a good party. With that, he ambled off to find more champagne. Without a word, she pelted down the hall. I want to know why there's a party when Ratigan just got his rear end beat. This is set supposedly pretty soon after the end of the movie, so Ratigan suffered a major defeat. His hideout is probably compromised, and I don't see why they're holding a party. I would think more like a war council or something like that. So without a word, she pelted down the hall. Line break. Ratigan. She burst into the room to find him standing at the far end, musing at a stunningly painted portrait of her assignment. Turning, he smiled graciously. Leisha, my dear, do come in. Why is she surprised at this portrait? One would think that Ratigan probably showed this portrait to her to help her identify Basil, because people don't really have photographs in this world. I mean, they're probably not very common anyways. That portrait would be a really good way of getting her to identify her target, so she shouldn't be surprised. Anyways, turning, he smiled graciously. Leisha, my dear, do come in. I'm not your dear, her mind screamed. Aloud, she growled. Who was that for? What was what for? He asked, arching an eyebrow innocently. You know bloody well what. You sent me to a bloody mouse house in the middle of bloody night, telling me he's a bleeding bachelor with no family so I can kill him. And what does he tell me? He ain't no bloody bachelor, he's a widower. Ratigan and a sadder mouse I ain't never seen in all me blasted days. She paused for a breath. So what in blazes do you mean, sending me down to kill a mouse what's already had the stuffing kicked out of him? It ain't right to kill an enemy what's not up for a fight, she glared at him. So, assuming she's basically been raised under Ratigan's fist all this time, from whence comes her rock-hard set of morals here? Her villainous honor. Where does that come from? Ratigan has no honor. He grinned, showing his gleaming white fangs. Leisha, 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 you and your pathetic scruples. She bristled fiercely, her scraggly fur standing on end. You know that's not how we operate. You seem to have trouble getting that into your scarred little head. Okay, well, at least it's At least he's mocking her for it. It still doesn't make sense where she got them, but at least, this isn't, accepted by Radigan. But you don't have to worry about it. If you'd rather not kill him, then don't. It doesn't matter to me anymore. Just take your little shriveled self away and let Uncle Radigan think. All right, dear? He patted her head condescendingly. With the most unladylike oath she could recall, Leisha stormed out of the room. Once she had left, Radigan heaved a great sigh, pleased with himself. Couldn't have orchestrated it better myself. Now for the next step. Raising his voice, he called, Fidget, get the girl and be quick about it. Phase 2 of Operation Sanity is in place. Operation Sanity. What is this? Operation Cobra from Once Upon a Time. And didn't we chuck Fidget into the river too? And he's even less likely to survive than Radigan? Whatever. Radigan has survived, and I didn't even explain why or how he survived, so whatever. Fidget magically survived too. Chapter 5. Remembered. Note. Sorry, this is not a new chapter. I'm having some trouble with fanfiction. Actually, though, I've gone back and revised, edited, combined several previous chapters, and am working on the rest of the chapters. He sat in his chair, staring at the fresh heap of firewood scattered on the hearth. His fingers moved to tune his violin, but he did not direct them. His mind was on everything and nothing all at once. Stop saying everything and nothing! She was dead. They were both dead. His Leisha. Alive? But if that was true, then what was false? And if that was false, then what was true? His mind reeled in dizzying circles as reason and logic whirled in his mind. I can't break out. I'll suffocate. No, stop. Think. Breathe. Now, what did you do after you reported their murders to the police? I prepared for their funerals, he answered himself aloud. Their funerals? Exactly who was buried that day? You know perfectly well. Philly and... He stared at the wall for a moment, stunned at his blindness. Vaulting to his feet, he cried, Why didn't I see it before? Stupid, bloody idiot that I am! He threw on his cloak as the memories tumbled back. He had been too grief-stricken, too scattered, to care that no one had found Leisha's remains in the ashes of the bonfire. Basil of Baker Street, however grief-stricken, would have chased that lead to the end of the earth if her body had not been found, if remains had not been found. He would have known something was up. Trying to hold himself together, he'd ordered a real grave dug for his wife and a memorial grave laid for his child. Body or no body, he would bury this pain. That had begun his attempts to survive, to live despite the howling emptiness. He'd thrown his doors open to anyone who had a case, no matter how poor, not out of charity, but out of the overwhelming drive to survive. If he hadn't hurled himself into something wholeheartedly, he would have been swallowed up in insanity. Which, again, I didn't build up enough. Cursing himself for a belligerent fool, his paw grasped the doorknob. I'll find Leisha or die trying. As he opened the door, the sound of a child's scream drifted to him on the faint night breeze. Line break. Leisha sighed, allowing the knots in her gut to unwind. Radigan had played her a nasty prank, of course, but he was the boss, and therefore entitled to do things like that. A sip of the strong might help me relax even more, she thought, glancing toward the cupboard where she kept her flasks. A child who knows nothing about alcohol imagines an alcohol cabinet lined with just flasks, which are nothing more than carrying cases, so not like full-on bottles where you could refill a flask. It's just a liquor cabinet lined with flasks. With a bang, her door flew open. Cursing in surprise, she jumped up, ready to flay the intruder 3 ways. Flay him with what? Do you have a knife? She fell silent as she saw a thug named Sork carrying a bundle to her bed. The bundle was crying. Sork? Really? Am I that desperate for names? As Sork turned to leave, Leisha dashed to the door and barred his way. What no bloody heck is that? She fumed. Sork shifted from foot to foot. Well, oh, look here, Leash. Boss's orders. Got to put the girl somewhere till she's healed up a bit. Her eyes narrowed. What girl? And healed? What's he care, unless... Sork looked more uncomfortable by the second. He did something to her, didn't he? Grabbing his shirt, she pulled him close and spat through clenched teeth. Sork, so help me, if you donna tell me what happened, I'll kick you there so hard you won't feel naught but pain till Friday. I don't know what accent I'm trying to go for at this point. Squirming, he pleaded, Hey, take it easy, Lee. She'll tell right enough, but it ain't a pretty story even for a crook. See, we got the girl Olivia, and when she lets loose, screaming and yammering and all that, Basil comes a-running like the hornet's got in his coat. She frowned. Basil, the bloke Ratkin sent me to kill. He nodded. Aye, lass. Anyway, Basil comes up and running, and Snicky catches him up and ties him up tight. Then Ratigan takes that girl there, and he closed his eyes at the gruesome memory. Dumps her in the flames like a wood chip. Icy fear flowed down her spine as she released her grip on Sork's shirt. Well, he continued reluctantly, Basil's strapped down hand and foot, see, and he starts howling like you ain't ever heard in all your days. Bloke looks like he's about to split wide open, arching his back against the chair we tied him to and all, and he goes real quiet and limp all of a sudden. Ratigan walks over and says, Why, Basil, old chum, what's the matter? Surely you've forgotten what happened by now. Oh, don't worry about Leisha. She's... His eyes widened and he slapped himself. Glory be, if I ain't gone and done it again. Muttering about the beatings he'd received, he pushed past Leisha and fled down the hall. This actually isn't the worst recap of something that happened off screen. From the villain's point of view. I mean, he's not the ultimate villain, but this is, I like this device. Bloke Basil knew me already? What else has the blasted rat not told me? Numbly, she strode over to the bed and unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a young mouseling, not more than 7 or 8. She lay scrunched in a shivering ball of charred, furless flesh, her eyes squinched tight against the burning pain. Problem is burning pain and all that. That's describing what Olivia feels, and we're in the point of view of Leisha right now, and we shouldn't leave the point of view of Leisha and describe what Olivia's feeling unless we're third-person omniscient, which I'm not right now, so it's a slip. There, Leisha said awkwardly. Don't worry, you'll be all right. The girl opened deep brown eyes, filled with agony. Make it stop, she begged. Leisha knew all too well what the mouseling meant. Line break. So where do we put the baggage? Boss said to give her a clean bed, feed her, and not touch her. He says the burns will heal sometime, but not if we touch her with our filthy hands. Right, into bed with you, charcoal. Rough hands dumped her onto clean linens. The air and cloth stung her exposed skin, and she cried. ... Yeah, this sentence needs to be broken down and restructured, because that's all one sentence. Ah, shut up. What's the matter with you? You're on a clean bed. Now shut up and sleep. I want my father. Where's father? She whimpered. He's gone, Leisha, soothed a deep, gravelly voice. She tried to pull the covers over her head, but her arms wouldn't move. The rat was the one who had... What had he done? She couldn't remember. But if he hadn't done anything to her, why was she so afraid of him? I'm not earning the memory loss that happened here. I haven't established any gaps or, focusing so much on the physical sensation of the pain that everything else is getting obliterated. All this stuff, again, I'm assuming and just cashing in on the fact that she's forgetting. He sat on her bed, taking her mangled paw in his own and stroking the melted flesh. She bit her lip, determined not to cry. Okay, now, since being 17, know a little bit more about burns, and it wouldn't be bite your lip and try not to cry. It's uncontrollable scream of agony. So, no. He left you all alone. He's not coming back. No, she howled. You liar. My father will come and get me. My father will come back and take me home, you dirty rat. Let me go. She pulled her paw free, and the pain of the movement sent her world spinning. She crumpled back, gasping. Line break. Leisha avoided touching, what had Sork called her? Livia. Livia, it'll be okay, she soothed. The pain'll go away in a few days. Big tears welled up in Livia's eyes as she nodded bravely. Leisha's emotions roiled. Rage, compassion, sympathy, confusion. Whispering, I'll be back later. Sleep a little. She left Livia and stormed out of the room. Thank you for just naming all of the feelings, child, without, Also, along with how much I just downplay the absolute agony of this, both Leisha and now Livia would likely die within a day without proper medical treatment. It's not just lay them down on the clean sheet and hope they survive unless you actually want them dead. Because that's not going to go. Line break. Red. It was all she could see as she flew down the hall, bowling over mice, lizards, and bats alike. Bursting into Radigan's banquet hall, she prepared to give him the worst tongue-lashing of his life when she saw what the rat had been up to. Skidding to a halt, she took in the scene with shock. We also haven't established why she has the right to give Radigan a tongue-lashing and get away with it. He's had mice eaten for much less, so who are you and why do you have this right? At the front of the hall stood the dais where Radigan usually made his speeches about his grand achievements and newest plans, but his throne had been replaced with an iron-barred cage. Inside, chained by each limb to a metal ring in the cage floor, was Basil of Baker Street. He stood, swaying from side to side, a blank look on his face. She couldn't bring herself to move. Though he looked like the Basil she had been sent to kill, seeing him now was like knocking on a cast-iron statue and hearing the hollow ring inside. Not bad, actually. I kind of like that. His impeccable suit was arrayed in perfection, and his fur neatly combed, but his bloodshot eyes held no sign of life, not even the grief she had seen before. Standing next to his cage was Radigan, enjoying a one-sided conversation with the stoic detective. "Oh, Basil, do snap out of it," he smirked. "My boys came here for a show from you, and they'll be so disappointed if they don't get it." The thugs booed and hissed, waving broken chair legs and clubs. "You're going to be the band's pet, or mascot, whichever you'd prefer, so you'll be here a while. You might as well learn some tricks." Basil didn't even blink. She had seen that look once before. Line break. Agony, agony. The flames seared her, choking her, claiming her bit by torturous bit. She opened her eyes. It was Father. He was reaching out to her, but could not touch her. His eyes, she saw he was collapsing into himself. Despair swallowed him, even as he tried vainly to save her. And his face. I am so overdramatic. Or is that melodramatic? Line break. A shrill scream split through the jeers. Basil's left eye twitched and then stilled. Leisha pushed through the thugs, shoving to get to the cage. On reaching it, she collapsed against it, stretching her arms through the bars. "Da! Da!" she sobbed. No response. "How sweet," Radigan purred. "Reunited after all these years. I wondered how long it would take you to remember." Shrieking with rage, she flung herself at him, claws outstretched. He laughed and snatched her flailing claws as he ordered his guards, "Take this young whoremouse back to her room and lock it." He whispered in her ear, "I'll be in to discuss this with you later." Chapter 6. Rescue. Fury drove Leisha to pace as the girl on her bed watched anxiously. "Water? Please," she croaked. Instantly, Leisha stopped and hurried to fetch the water jug. Sitting on Livia's bed, she let the soothing liquid fall into her mouth. Into Olivia's mouth, not her own mouth. Careful to keep the porcelain from touching the child's scorched lips. Leisha didn't need to be a nurse to know that Livia was running a high fever and developing infection. I don't say how she knows this. Is it because of the glazed look in her eyes? Is it because she's starting to murmur incoherently? Is it because this is what happened to her before? I mean, is the discharge out of the skin a different color? What's left of the skin a different color? I mean, I don't establish why she knows this at all, despite, she's not a nurse, but she knows it anyway. Like, acknowledging that doesn't make it better. Blast the stupid rat. If he'd only let me take the girl to a right proper hospital, she wouldn't get no scarring like I have. How do you think burning works, child? How do you think burning works? She gazed at her lumpy paws mournfully. What am I doing? Why am I waiting around? It ain't gonna do nothing for her. Decision hardened in her, and she bent to whisper in Livia's ear. "No, listen here, Livia. It's real important. I know you're in lots of pain, and I know that everything what touch you hurts like the blazes, but whatever I do, you mustn't cry nor make no noise, understand?" Livia nodded, her eyes wide. "Good, 'cause I'm gonna break us out of here." "What about Mr. Basil?" The child's sad tones wrenched at Leisha. "I don't know, Livia," she said honestly, "but I got to get you out of here first. It's what Mr. Basil would want, eh?" With that, she pushed aside her nightstand and pressed a panel in the wall. A tiny slot opened, and she withdrew a small leather pouch. She walked over to the door and rapped on it. "No, Leash," came a whiny voice. "You know boss's orders. You can't come out." "Snork, come here. I got a proposal." Leash, is this going to get me in trouble?" "Probably, but I can make it worth your while." There was a brief silence, followed by the sound of a key turning in a lock. Sork peeked his head in, curious. Alicia pulled out the pouch and briefly showed him the contents. Gaping, he listened as she whispered in his ear. He shook his head and muttered something, to which Alicia sighed and nodded. She tore a sleeve off her shirt and wadded it up. Crossing the room, she placed it in Livia's mouth. "Here, Livia, if you get starting too much, bite down hard, all right?" Livia closed her eyes tightly in answer. Gently, Alicia wrapped Livia in a dark blanket, trying to block out her groans, unending screams, probably, and gathered the bundle into her arms. She passed to the open door and slipped 2 diamonds into Sork's leathery paw. His eyes followed the pair as Alicia slunk along the passage toward the exit. "Best of luck to the 2 of ye," he whispered sadly. Line break. Did I do the right thing? Worry tormented her. She scurried back into Radigan's lair. "Dinna be stupid," she chided. "Course you did right. You got the girl to the hospital, didn't you? But your savings, you're hard. Went to a good cause. Had to get Livia out. What's left for you now, though? Radigan'll kill you when he finds out. I'll take me diamonds and move somewhere else. While we're at it, how you figure on getting Basil out of that bird cage?" She ducked behind a wine cask as 2 mice swaggered by, giggling drunkenly. How was she going to get him free? She pursed her lips in thought. What I want to know is why she didn't tell the police where Radigan's hideout is if she's got nothing left to live for with Radigan anyways. Line break. Snicky is such a stupid name. Snicky and the other thugs set to guard Basil, caroused around his cage in a drunken version of Ring Around the Posies. They were about to carry on with London bridges falling down when a harsh guttural voice cut their merriment short. "Oi, lads, boss sent me to pick up this load of baggage." The speaker was a tall mouse in a ragged black trench coat with a black cloth face mask. Snicky reeled over and slurred, "And who might you be?" The stranger shoved him aside. "My name's none of your business. Radigan wants the mouse now." "Really?" he sniggered. "Well, we'll just hand him over to you. He ain't no fun nohow, but what's the password?" The stranger stiffened. "Password? What password? Radigan didn't give me no password." Snickster instead of Snicky? Is his name Snickster or Snicky? Oh, this is so stupid. Snickster winked at his giggling comrades. "Oh, I forgot to give the password, did he? Oh dear, much too bad, much too bad. Looks like you'll have to pay the password tax." "Password tax!" the stranger exploded angrily. "What nonsense!" The lizard shrugged. "If you want to go and face the boss without the mouse, be my guest." The stranger growled and fished out a leather pouch and handed it to Snickster, who snatched it greedily. "Glory be!" he whooped. "Bag's chock full of bloody diamonds! Let him loose, chaps!" A key was procured and Basil's cage opened. Next his chains were removed from the floor, but remained locked around his wrists and ankles. He didn't budge. Shrugging, Snicky explained, "He's been that way all bleeding day. Don't sleep, don't eat, don't drink, just stands and stares." The stranger snatched Basil's chains and tugged at them hard. The bewildered detective stepped out and followed the black-clad figure in a daze as he was led out the hall. This really shouldn't be working. Nearly dragging Basil, Alicia hurried through the twists and turns and roundabouts designed to confuse outsiders. Every moment she was sure she would hear someone coming to get them, but nothing happened. With a cry of relief, she spotted the exit and dashed out. The sight that met her eyes pulled her up short so quickly that Basil slammed into her from behind. "You're late, Alicia," Radigan sneered. Alicia's knees buckled. Radigan and his whole gang had the exit surrounded, and even as she turned around, they blocked off the tunnel she had come from. She was too frightened to protest when Snicky wrenched Basil's chains from her clenched paws. "Sorry, Leash," he snarled, "but my loyalties lie with the boss. Unlike some mice I know." He cast a pointed glare at Sork, bound and gagged at Radigan's feet. Slowly, Leisha brought her eyes up to face Radigan. "I know I done right," she told herself as he approached her. "I'll die knowing I did something right." He towered over her. His face was pale and his voice quiet. "You dare betray me?" Leisha made no reply. His claws whipped out and slashed Leisha's eyes. Her world went black and she howled in pain. She stumbled back and rough hands shoved her forward. Which way is forward? Hands grabbed her shirt, and Radigan's enraged voice screeched, "Did you really think you could free him, you bloody chunk of cat bait? Even if you'd gotten him home, he would never be the same again. He would not know up from down. Can't you see that, you used lump of charcoal? I made him go insane. He's in such deep mental shock, he will never come out of it again." I just feel like Radigan wouldn't talk like this. He wouldn't talk like a psychologist. And he wouldn't talk like a 17-year-old fanfiction writer trying to do something dramatic. "No," she whimpered. "Da! Da! Da!" He lashed out, striking her. "He doesn't have the intellect of a stone, much less a father. Face it, Leisha." She crumpled to the cold, hard cobblestones, sobbing. He took her paw and stroked it, cooing. "Don't worry about him. He will be well fed and looked after by my men. He won't even know that he's on display every day. Who knows?" He chuckled evilly. "Perhaps he'll recover enough for me to teach him simple tricks. As for you, you are, how shall we put this, released from duty to me." Horrified, she groped around, trying to find the filthy rat and wring his neck, but she could see nothing. "That's right, you street slut. Blind and without a talent to your name, that's all you'll be able to do. Maybe I'll drop by occasionally, though I'll probably be the only one who will be able to stand the sight of your mangled body." With that, Radigan tore off her clothing. I had this thing where I just felt like the worst thing that could ever possibly happen to me would be rape, and I therefore tended to write about it a lot. I was kind of processing my fear of that a lot, and it kept going into other fan fictions. You'll see later, but I don't really know what to say about it. It's something that should be treated very carefully in fiction. I feel like it's out of place here. I put it in there because it's the worst thing I could imagine happening at the time, and I was really afraid, and so I wrote about it. Cold air rushed onto her skin, and tears seeped from her sightless eyes. I would think blood would be seeping from her sightless eyes right now. The jeers and catcalls started, and she felt hands sliding over her corded, leathery skin. She swung with her paws wildly, but she couldn't see where she hit. A fist knocked her to the ground, and she heard zippers pull down. Curling into a ball, she prayed for death. A loud baying hushed the crowd. A sharp bark came, louder this time, and she felt the crowd withdrawing hurriedly. Somewhere she heard a shrill, hate-filled scream. By the feel of the wind rushing past her, the thugs were running for their lives. Shivering, she crawled to her feet and tottered forward. "Hopefully the pup's friendly." She held her hands out beseechingly. "Here, doggy, good doggy, do help, won't you?" A large wet tongue lapped at her, and she heard a friendly snuffling. "Good heavens! Basil!" She frowned at the strange voice. It came toward her, calling, "Basil, old chap, this way! What the blazes are you staring for? We must leave before Radigan's minions come down on us all. Oh, great Scott!" Ashamed, she realized the stranger had caught sight of her. Before she could say anything, a jacket had been flung over her shoulders. There, madam," he soothed. "You'll be safe now. Just climb up on Toby now. I'll get Basil and we'll go to his house. His housekeeper will find you suitable clothing. Basil! Basil! Over here!" His voice grew fainter as he left her side. Trembling, she said, "Toby." She was rewarded by a friendly bark. "Toby, then. Will you help me up, lad? I cannot see." A huge whooshing sound surrounded her, and when she felt forward, she found the dog's muzzle laid on the ground. Gingerly, Leisha climbed up, aided by Toby's yips of encouragement and warning growls whenever she was in danger of climbing out onto thin air. By the time she had found a place to anchor herself, the gentleman, who introduced himself as Dr. Dawson, had shoved Basil onto the eager puppy. Without another word, they were off. The wind on her cheeks caressed her, drying her tears. She leaned down and put her nose in Toby's fur, breathing in the sweaty, sweet doggy smells. I'm free. Chapter 7. Healing. Time waits for no man or mouse, and a month passed unusually swiftly. In that time, Leisha had become very handy with a cane, and finding her way around Basil's house was easy. Dr. Dawson had done the best he could, but the filth in Radigan's claws had infected her eyes. The damage was permanent. I would think the gouges through her eyeballs also kind of did something about the vision thing. Just saying! Don't worry, my dear, he said sincerely. You did a very brave thing. Olivia has finally recovered and wants to see you soon. Mr. Flaversham dug into his rainy day savings and was able to play a good plastic surgeon and burns specialist to heal her skin. She looks good as new. And Basil, well," he sighed and patted her shoulder. "At least he's eating on his own again. Still won't speak to no one." No, he still won't speak to anyone." Leisha smirked. Dr. Dawson meant well, but she had lived on the streets too long to relearn proper speech patterns. Better if she was a little defiant about it, because she could relearn new speech patterns if she wanted. "Ach, my cakes, my cheese crumpets!" The smell of burnt pastries reached her shortly after the housekeeper's shrill voice. Excuse me, dear," Dr. Dawson mumbled. "I must try to calm her down. Those precious cheese crumpets of hers and all. Here." He shoved a loaded tray into her hands. "Would you take this up to Basil? It's nearly tea time." He sighed sadly. "He did so love his tea." "I'm not your dear," she muttered, but carried the tray upstairs to Basil's room. Opening the door, she counted 10 steps until she reached his bed. Gently, she whispered, Da, you awake?" A slight rustling of the covers answered her. She gently set the tray in his lap. "Eat up, Da. Smells like a feast. If I'm not wrong, that's your favourite mint-leaf tea with a big old helping of unburnt cheese crumpets." She laughed quietly. "Your poor housekeeper's driving us all mad with her obsessions. Everything's got to be perfect for when you snap out of it. Da, you will snap out of it, won't you?" All she heard was the crunch of cheese crumpets, followed by an occasional sip of tea. When she thought he was finished, she moved the tray out of the way. It described the sounds of being finished, like the silence, the no more crunching, the no more sipping, the click of the tea cup on the saucer is better. Misspelled cautiously. Cautiously. Cautiously, she sat on the bed and took his smooth furred paws in her own fleshy ones. She stroked them softly as she sang, "Oh, oh, 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 child's old poetry. Oh, okay, I'm gonna read this and it's gonna hurt. Alone on the vast and wildest sea, I heard the wind cry out to me, 'Go back to your home, you're needed there. Your mother's tears soaked through her hair. Your father's silent fears scream loud, and covers his mind in confusing shroud.' And so I screamed into the sea, 'I'll come no more, nor sail on thee. My absence caused me family grief. If I start, I'll be home by the first green leaf.'" Oh, I'm stretching so hard. Oh, it hurts. "But the sea called back in a fury quite black, 'We'll not let you go. You can't leave now. You've served us long. Just keep at the prow.' But I shut up me ears and turned me ship home, and I ne'er looked back on the watery foam. I look back on me years, and I solidly know I made the right choice, and it's caused me no woe." "Leisha?" she gasped. She hadn't heard that voice since the night she'd come to kill. What is that song? Is that song any, special meaning to her? Is it any special meaning to him? Did she just make it up on the spot? Why is that what snaps him out of it? "Da?" she asked hopefully. "Da, is it you?" "Leisha." She felt for his face and stroked his cheek. She felt a smile pull at his face as he touched her hands and slipped into a peaceful sleep. Line break. "A little left. Good. Now straight ahead." Basil leaned heavily on his daughter's arm as he directed her path. Though he had recovered from the damage in his mind, he would never fully regain his strength. Dr. Dawson often commented worriedly about how Basil's tan fur had gone silver overnight, but Basil always dismissed him with a witty remark. Leisha smiled proudly. "My dad's so smart." Ever since she'd woken her father from his shock, she'd been getting bits of information about her past. She'd been 7 when Radigan took her, and had spent 7 years serving him, which made her 14. She was thrilled just to know how old she was. Also, Dawson had calmed Basil's fears, informing him that Radigan wouldn't bother him again. Apparently, the night they had been rescued, Toby had spotted the enraged rat and had bitten his head off. Basil had smiled weakly, relieved he could rest safely at last. "There, stop, Leisha. We're here." She halted and eased him to a sitting position. The smell of fresh green grass was everywhere, and birds sang in the sky. "I never heard none of this before. Maybe the extra hearing and smelling's a blessing reserved for the blind." She knelt down, and Basil placed her paws on a smooth slab of marble standing upright. "This where Ma is?" "Yes, dear, this is where I buried Philly." "Da?" "Yes, Leisha." "I'm glad I'm your dear." They sat in silence. No words were needed, so no words were spoken. Each knew that deeper healing had begun. The end. Okay, so it's not my worst fic, but major thing is it needed more build-up, basically. And I also don't like that last sentence. Aside from the error, each knew that a deeper healing had begun. It's too Hallmark card. Anyway, so that was when logic fails, and there was, at some point, I know I wrote a sequel. I can't even remember what I called it because I had actually written myself into a corner, and I had no idea how to get out of this corner, and so I was so disappointed in myself that this is one of the few fan fictions I actually deleted. So, because I just wanted it to end here if I couldn't fix the second one. So, yeah, this is officially where it ends. Okay, and it looks like the next fic is okay. And I'm just saying flat out, there are 2 fan fictions I refuse to do in this list, and one of them is one called The Song of Songs, where I tried to retell The Song of Songs, and another one is Prostitute to the Nations, where I tried to do Ezekiel 16. And I don't want to do them because they're just like word for words, fleshing out, retelling of those stories, and the idea bothers me, and I wish I hadn't done them, but I did them, and I really, really don't want to talk about them. So, the next one will be Another Set of Eyes, which is my single oldest Invader Zim fanfiction. You can look forward to that. Have a great evening, guys.